And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week 9 Waiver Wire Show. I'm Dylan Burd here on the Sports Burd podcast, and we got a lot to talk about today in terms of the waiver wire, in terms of injury replacements, and in terms of everything that happened in Week 9. Definitely a great week. If you follow my prop show over on Sal Vetri's YouTube channel, I actually went 5-3 on my props this week. I went 6-2 last week, so I'm 11-5 on those in the last 2 weeks. Feeling pretty good about that. But if you don't know me, if you don't follow me already, I do this waiver show every single Tuesday. Sometimes it's pre-recorded, sometimes it's live. I actually did it live last week for the first time, and it worked out really, really well. So I decided I would go and do a live show once again this week. We will see how it works out going forward, but I'm certainly considering keeping the live show on Tuesdays. And then I also do my college football picks, betting picks on Fridays. I'm probably going to keep that at pre-recorded, but we'll see how this works out today. I'm really, really excited for it, as I said before. And just remember, if you do not follow me already on Twitter, you could follow me at sports_Burd. Feel free to DM me about any fantasy football questions. Feel free to tweet at me about any fantasy football questions or just anything at all. And I'll be sure to help you out, answer you. Love having conversations with people. I've already had some people hitting me up on Twitter, and I absolutely love it. I love interacting with people in the community. It's a great thing. Also, if you aren't already subscribed to this YouTube channel, you could subscribe at Sport. You could subscribe to this YouTube channel. You could also go on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify and subscribe there as well. Now, be sure to comment. Be sure to like this video. Smash that like button. It really helps me out. So let's get right to it. So we start off with the AFC East, and we always start off with the New York Jets. As I've mentioned before, I am a fan of the New York Jets, sadly. It's a really, really bad thing. And, and I mean, this team got absolutely crushed this week. The Chiefs pretty much manhandled them, easily covered that 19.5-point spread. Wide receivers, Jamison Crowder and Brashad Perriman were both out of this game. Crowder missing the game with a groin injury and Brashad Perriman missing the game with a concussion. As a result, Denzel Mims, the rookie from Baylor, was the number one wide receiver in his second career, NFL game. He had 2 catches for 42 yards receiving on 3 targets. Mims is a guy that I mentioned that you could possibly look at, but with the way the Jets are passing, I would not trust Mims too much, especially when Crowder comes back and when Perriman comes back. But looking at the running back snap share, you had LaMichael Pirine grabbing 48.2% of the snaps, 8 carries for 27 yards rushing, 2 for 6 receiving, and then Frank Gore, the 37-year-old running back, 39.3% of the snap share, 10 for 30 rushing. So it looks like Pirine has finally surpassed Frank Gore in terms of snap share, which is absolutely great to see. And, you know, he's not really doing much with it because this Jets offense is so bad. So again, if you're in a deep league, I would pick up Pirine just to have running back depth. It's better to have a starting running back than a backup, in my opinion, a lot of the times. But, as I say every week, the Jets are 0-8. They have scored less than 20 points in 6 out of 7 games. Wow, I screwed up the graphic here. I should say 7 out of 8 games they've scored less than 20 points. The only time they scored over 20, this year is when they played against the Broncos on Thursday Night Football, and they only had 1 offensive touchdown in that game and scored 28 points, which is pretty hilarious. Do not touch anyone on the team until proven otherwise, unless you have Jamison Crowder, who has been really, really good this year, mostly because he's in Gase's offense and they just throw 7-yard passes to him every single play. But moving away from the dumpster fire that is the New York Jets, we move on to the Miami Dolphins. Quarterback Tua Tagovailoa has underwhelmed in his debut. He went 12 for 22 passing, 93 passing yards, and 1 touchdown. That's pretty much all I have to say about the Dolphins. Their defense looked absolutely phenomenal against the Rams, and that's the reason they won the game. But not much else to talk about there. I'm curious to see how Tua does in next week's game. So moving on to the New England Patriots, another team in addition to the New York Jets that looks absolutely horrible in this division. And ironically, the Jets play the Patriots on Monday Night Football next weekend. So a horrible Monday night matchup next week. But I'm sure the Patriots will get back on track since they're playing the Jets. Oh yeah, by the way, I have some questions rolling in to the comment section here. I'm going to hold all questions until the end after I finish, talking through all the teams' waiver wire injury replacements, and then I will answer questions at the end. So keep sending questions throughout the show, and I'll be sure to answer them at the end. But keep sending the questions. I see them coming in. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just waiting until the end. All right. Now, to the Patriots. The running back snap share has been one that's been very difficult to predict all season. We have Rex Burkhead in this game getting the most snaps out of anyone on the team. Out of any running back on the team, 47.5%, 6 for 26 rushing, 1 for 5 receiving. James White, 44.3% of the snaps, 2 carries for no yards rushing, 2 for 35 receiving. And Damian Harris, only 32.8% of the snaps, but he got by far the most carries, 16 for 102 and a touchdown. It seems like Damian Harris is the guy that's the most viable fantasy option out of these running backs. James White, even in PPR league, is not getting much action at all, not getting many touches. And Harris, he's had these games where he's rushed for over 100 yards, so he has looked pretty impressive so far. I wouldn't really touch any running backs besides Damian Harris, but even Damian Harris, it's so hard to predict what's going to happen with New England every week, the way that they're splitting the snap share up. Damian Harris got 16 carries on the least amount of snap share out of all the running backs. So not really sure what to think of him completely, but he has done well when he's been put on the field. Also worth mentioning, wide receiver Jacoby Myers had 6 catches for 58 yards receiving on 10 targets, which was a whopping 43.5% of the target share. Second straight game that Myers has led the team in targets. So just thought that was interesting. Wouldn't actually pick up Jacoby Myers yet, but it's something to consider for the future. And just keep an eye on, honestly. But, moving on to the Buffalo Bills, the only thing to mention here really is that running back snap share where Dak Moss, the rookie from Utah, surpassed his Devin Singletary. Moss getting 52.6% of the snaps, 14 carries for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns rushing. So a coming out party for him. And then Devin Singletary, 45.6% of the snaps, 14 for 86 rushing, 1 for 6 receiving. Wide receiver Cole Beasley, who I've been monitoring week by week, 2 for 24 only on 2 targets receiving. So just a bad passing game for Josh Allen and the Bills in general. I don't really think you should put too much stock into this based on how the receivers did for this game, but the Bills haven't been playing well. Allen hasn't been playing well either. So Allen has definitely taken a step down from where he was at the beginning of the season. The Bills have definitely taken a step down from where they are at the beginning of the season, and they have a gauntlet of a schedule coming up, play a ton of tough teams. So I'm pretty out on the Buffalo Bills right now. I was last year. This is not in terms of fantasy. This is just in terms of the NFL. But I think the Bills are going to start to struggle even more as these next few weeks come up. But moving on from the AFC East to the AFC North, and like I said, just bear with me a little bit because, again, this is a very new thing for me, the live show. So I'm not 100% great with all the graphics and technology. So I'm just trying to figure all that out early here. But, we're trying to push through it. And there we go, putting the NFC North graphic up. Okay, all right. There's a transition. And okay, so Baltimore Ravens, starting off with them. Running back Mark Ingram missed week 8 with an ankle injury. And as a result, the running back snap share, you had J.K. Dobbins, 65.8% of the snaps, 15 for 113 rushing. Gus Edwards, 32.9% of the snaps, has a very nice day as well, 16 for 87 and 1 rushing. So, few things to take away here. J.K. Dobbins, really, really, really good. Has just not been getting touches this season. So I said to hold on to J.K. Dobbins if you had him. I've been saying this for weeks. Just because J.K. Dobbins was not getting the snaps, he's too good to not eventually get snaps at some point this season. And obviously the injury to Mark Ingram opened the door for that. So good for J.K. Dobbins. I think this is going to lead to an increase in touches for him moving forward. And Gus Edwards also does a really, really solid job here. And just keep in mind that this is against the best defense in the league in the Pittsburgh Steelers. So really impressive from these Ravens backs. I like J.K. Dobbins as a pickup if he's still available in your league. And Gus Edwards may not be a bad pickup either, as long as Mark Ingram remains sidelined with that ankle injury. Now moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals, we have running back Joe Mixon, who missed week 8 with a foot injury. So he's been out for 2 weeks now, and as a result, we had the running back snap share, Giovanni Bernard, getting 65.2% of the snaps, 15 for 62 yards rushing and a touchdown, 3 for 16 and 1 touchdown receiving. So another really, really solid week for Gio Bernard replacing Joe Mixon. Now the Bengals are on a bye, so following that bye in week 10, Mixon should definitely be back in the fold. Also worth mentioning that Samaje Perine, 31.9% of the snaps, 10 for 32 and 1 rushing, 1 for 2 receiving. Don't really have much else to say about the Bengals because, again, they are on a bye. Mixon will be likely back in week 10. Pittsburgh Steelers, nothing to report in terms of waiver wire, in terms of injuries. There was nothing significant between, the wide receivers, the running backs, no injuries. So good for them, staying healthy, playing well. Huge win against the Ravens to move to 7-0, but we will move on here to the Cleveland Browns. So, as it happened last week, wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. out for the season, torn ACL. And as a result, I mentioned that people that you would want to watch out for in terms of the wide receivers there who are going to possibly take over that wide receiver number 2 spot on the team, Rashard Higgins and Donovan Peoples-Jones. Both did absolutely nothing in this game. Higgins had 1 for 14 on 3 targets, and Donovan Peoples-Jones had 0 targets in the game. So something that really affected this game was there was awful weather, awful wind, rain, and as a result, neither team really threw the ball that much. So I would not take my eye off of Rashard Higgins and Donovan Peoples-Jones. I do think that they could definitely contribute going forward on this Browns team once the Browns finally get into good weather. But in addition, also worth mentioning that tight end Austin Hooper did miss week 8 with the appendicitis, so he will hopefully be back in the future. But not much else to say here. We are going to move on to the AFC South. Again, just bear with me for the graphics change here. And I'm hoping that I find a way to, do this faster. I use StreamYard for this, so we'll have to see what happens there. But all right, here we go. So Jacksonville Jaguars, bye week this week, but worth mentioning that quarterback Gardner Minshew will miss week 9, likely with a thumb injury, and the rookie from Oregon State, quarterback Jake Luton, is likely to replace him. We'll see how that goes. I imagine it won't go well for them, but nothing else to say. Bye week for them this week. Wide receiver T.Y. Hilton for the Indianapolis Colts left the game with a groin injury in week 8, so interesting there. Now, I don't really have much to say about the wide receivers because these Indy wide receivers have been banged up all year, and it's just been a week-to-week thing about who ends up, doing well, who doesn't do well. I was hyping up Zach Pascal for a while. Hasn't really done much this year at all, but what was really interesting in this game was the running back snap share. You had wide receiver, even you had running back Jordan Wilkins, who is actually 0.5% owned on ESPN right now. I sometimes I project, I don't project, but I check out ownership across season-long leagues, and I use ESPN to do that. But Jordan Wilkins, 0.5% owned, and he got 50.7% of the snaps, 20 for 89 and a touchdown rushing, and 1 for 24 receiving. Jonathan Taylor, 33.3% of the snaps, only 11 carries for 22 yards rushing, 2 for 9 receiving on 3 targets. And then you had Nyheim Hines. Hines has been kind of back and forth this year. He had a great week 1. He was that number 1 waiver wire pickup for so many people in week 1. And again, he's just been back and forth. Some weeks he shows up, some weeks he doesn't. He had 21.3% of the snaps, 5 for 8 rushing, and 3 for 54 and 2 receiving on 5 targets. Still available in approximately 66% of leagues. Not the worst pickup I've ever seen, but I'm really concerned for Jonathan Taylor. I don't know why he was not getting a lot of snaps in this game. I don't believe he got hurt. It could have been maybe because they were up a lot and Wilkins was the hot hand, so they just went with it. But if I were a Jonathan Taylor owner, I would be a little bit worried, and I would consider picking up Wilkins and or Hines. So, moving on to the Tennessee Titans, we have wide receiver Adam Humphries left the game with a concussion, and that was the only injury news for them. But a huge thing happened. Wide receiver Corey Davis, 8 catches for 128 yards and a touchdown receiving on 10 targets, which was 34.5% of the share. So Corey Davis has been very low key this year. Really, really good. I remember Matthew Berry tweeting after week 1, Davis, I don't know if you remember Monday Night Football in week 1 had a solid season opener. And Matthew Berry said, I think it's possible that Corey Davis may be the Devontae Parker of this year where, doesn't really show up for the first few years of his career and then all of a sudden has a breakout year. And that's looked to be true. In PPR leagues, Corey Davis has scored in double digits in every game that he's played this season. 3 of his 5 games, he's scored over 15 points, and he's still available in pretty much 2/3 of leagues. He's only owned in 36.7% of leagues on ESPN.com. So if you need a wide receiver, Corey Davis is definitely one of my top targets this week. I've had him in a few leagues this year. It seems like even with A.J. Brown back, Davis is still a guy who's used a lot. So Davis is a really, really good option on the waiver wire this week. I think that at this point, this is not just a fluky beginning of the season. I mean, we're already half the way through, and he's playing really, really well. So pick him up if you need a wide receiver. Now, moving on to the Houston Texans. They were on a bye week, so we will not talk about them. We have the trade deadline coming up at 4 p.m. It will be very, very interesting to see if the Texans do move on from Will Fuller. They are rumored to be possibly moving on to Will Fuller. Can you imagine if Will Fuller gets traded to the Packers? I mean, that would be interesting for sure for his fantasy value. But this is not a trade deadline show. We'll talk about that later once the trades get in at 4 o'clock, if there are any. You know, the NFL is kind of back and forth year by year, whether it's a busy trade deadline or not busy trade deadline. I do expect a few moves to get done today. But let's move on to the AFC West. So, sorry about this. Just getting the AFC West up here. And moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs. So the running back snap share, something that we've been looking at with Le'Veon Bell coming into the fold. We had Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the rookie from LSU, 50% of the snaps, only 6 for 21 rushing, 3 for 10 receiving on 3 targets. And then Le'Veon Bell in what I thought would be a revenge game against the Jets, only 25.8% of the snaps, 6 carries for 7 yards rushing, 3 for 31 receiving on 3 targets. I guess the Chiefs like Clyde better than Bell. Tough to tell in a game where they absolutely blew out the Jets. You had Darrell Williams getting carries at the end of the game. I still think Clyde, has that edge over Bell. That's going to probably remain the same for the rest of the year. And Bell, he didn't play well with the Jets, and he hasn't really proved that much through 2 games with the Chiefs. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I do think Bell definitely lost a step from his time in Pittsburgh. So I do think Clyde remains having a pretty substantial edge over him going forward. Everyone in Kansas City had an unreal day in this game, but just remember it's the Jets. Don't overreact to Mecole Hardman or Demarcus Robinson going absolutely off because they've been so inconsistent all year. So don't necessarily jump on them just because of a game that they had against the worst team in the NFL. So moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers. Something we've been talking about every week with Austin Eckler being out with a hamstring injury is the running back snap share. And we had running back Justin Jackson getting the most snaps this week. This has been so back and forth, so hard to predict. Last week, Josh Kelly got the majority of the snaps, and now you have Justin Jackson getting the most snaps on his team as well. And you have Troymaine Pope coming into the picture, getting more snaps than Joshua Kelly. So I don't really know what's going on with the Chargers. I don't really think they like Kelly that much. It seems like they did at the beginning of the season, but his usage has definitely tapered off as the season went on. But as I said, Justin Jackson, 46.4% of the snaps, 17 carries, 86 yards rushing, 3 catches for 56 yards, or 53 yards, I should say, receiving on 5 targets. Troymaine Pope, 29.8% of the snaps, 10 for 67 rushing, 5 for 28 receiving on 7 targets. And then Joshua Kelly, only 23.8% of the snaps, 7 for 32 rushing, 1 for -7 receiving. I'm not against dropping Joshua Kelly at this point. It's clear that not only is he not very good, he's not going to have a major role going forward. And again, this is just a very, very tough backfield to project. So I would not feel comfortable, playing or starting Justin Jackson in a season-long league either going forward. But one guy I do want to mention is wide receiver Mike Williams. 5 catches for 99 yards and 1 touchdown receiving on 8 targets. He's extremely inconsistent. Mike Williams is one of those guys who he either goes absolutely nuts in a week or he just does absolutely nothing. He's one of those players. He's probably going to be like that for his entire career. But when he actually produces, he does go off. Really, really good game for him here. Not a bad guy to grab. He's still available in a lot of leagues. Also one of those guys that every single time he catches the ball, it's a highlight play. But I would like to see Mike Williams' usage go up a lot. But we'll see what happens. He's going to be a very inconsistent player. but he's also not a bad guy to grab because he ultimately is that number 2 wide receiver on that team. And with Justin Herbert playing absolutely lights out, by the way, Herbert's now owned in over 90% of leagues. With Herbert playing lights out, Williams' production could go up the rest of the season. Moving on to the Las Vegas Raiders, we have wide receiver Nelson Aguilar, who scored in 3 consecutive games going in. And I said, you know what? I said, this guy's barely owned, but he may be worth a shot at this point after catching a touchdown in 3 consecutive games, I should say. But had 0 receptions in this game on 2 targets. Again, this Raiders-Brown game was awful in terms of the weather, in terms of the wind. So do not overreact to this game completely. Moving on to the Denver Broncos, we have wide receiver Tim Patrick, missed week 8 with a hamstring injury. And then we have running back Phillip Lindsay, who had another solid game, 6 for 83 and 1 touchdown rushing, 1 for 3 receiving on 3 targets. So he actually receives 44.1% of the snap share compared to Melvin Gordon's 55.9. However, with Melvin Gordon there, he's still probably going to continue to get single-digit touches. So I wouldn't bank on Lindsay going forward because, again, he only did get 6 carries in this game. He just happened to break a long touchdown run. So as long as Melvin Gordon is there, Lindsay's workload will likely not increase substantially at all. Now we're going to move on to the NFC East here. Now the NFC East is once again just a complete disaster, and we're going to start off with the Dallas Cowboys, who I'm going to keep that line up there for as long as they are in purgatory, which is probably the rest of this year. But, quote, this is bad. This is very, very bad. If you ever seen that Stephen A. Smith meme, it's one of the best ones. It's hilarious, but that's exactly what I think of when I think of the Dallas Cowboys because they're an absolute disaster. Started 3rd-string quarterback Ben DiNucci this week. He was absolutely dreadful. There's not much else to say. And as a result, all these receivers, it must suck for them. They were playing so well with Dak Prescott playing. And now DiNucci comes in and their fantasy stock is pretty much just tanked. Not much else to say about the Cowboys. But moving on to the New York Giants, we have running back Devonta Freeman missed the game last night with an ankle injury. As a result, Wayne Gallman getting the most snaps, 44% of the snaps, 12 carries, 44 yards, and a touchdown rushing, 1 for 18 receiving. And then you have Alfred Morris, who apparently is still in the league. The Giants just recently signed him, 8 for 28 rushing. And then Dion Lewis, 28% of the snap share, 2 catches for 8 yards and 1 touchdown receiving. One guy that I do want to give a huge shout out to, though, is wide receiver Sterling Shepard, who is one of my top waiver pickups of the week. I understand that he is probably owned in around 2/3 of leagues and available in only 1/3. But if you are one of those 1/3, if you are in that 1/3 of leagues where he's still available, he's a guy you got to grab, especially if you're playing in a PPR league. Sterling Shepard got 8 catches for 74 yards receiving on 10 targets last night, 24.4% of the share. So this is his second game since he's been back second game back since he was injured. And it's the second good game he's had in a row. He did have a touchdown last week. He had 3 red zone targets as well last week against the Eagles and 6 catches. So this is a guy that's going to be targeted a ton by Daniel Jones and a guy that I think could produce at a pretty decent level the rest of the season as long as he stays healthy. Now, in terms of the Washington football team, bye week, not going to talk about him this week. Moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles, where you had running back Miles Sanders, who missed week 8 with a knee injury. As a result, running back Boston Scott, 15 carries, 70 yards rushing, 2 for 9 receiving on 2 targets. What a gift it is to play that Dallas Cowboys defense, who's the worst defense I've ever seen. Now you have tight end Dallas Goedert returning from that ankle injury, 1 for 15 only on 1 target. Wide receiver Jalen Reagor, the rookie from TCU, also returned from injury, 3 for 16 and 1 on 6 targets, receiving 23.1% of the target share. Reagor is a guy that I consider looking at if Carson Wentz gets better, but Carson Wentz has been absolutely dreadful. Carson Wentz almost got outplayed by Ben DiNucci, and that's how bad Carson Wentz played. He had 127 yards passing only and had 4 turnovers, 2 interceptions, and 2 fumbles. So Carson Wentz has looked like a disaster, and as a result, other than Travis Fulgham and Boston Scott, if Miles Sanders is out, no guys on that team you could rely on pretty much. But Fulgham, another really good week. He's pretty much owned in 100% of leagues at this point, so no point in putting him up there on the graphic, but shout out to him. He's been unreal. Now we move on to the NFC North here, where we have the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones missing the game once again, calf injury. And then you have running back Jamal Williams taking his place, 16 for 75 rushing, 6 for 27 receiving on 6 targets. So, big thing that happened in Green Bay. They have a Thursday night game coming up against the 49ers, and A.J. Dillon, the running back, the rookie from Boston College, tested positive for COVID. As a result, due to NFL COVID rules, they said that Jamal Williams, due to close contact and contact tracing, has to quarantine. So as a result, he will miss Week 9's game, leaving Aaron Jones, Tyler Ervin, and Dexter Williams as the only running backs that could potentially be active for this game. However, there's a lot of pessimism, that's a direct quote, pessimism, about Jones playing in Week 9. So running backs Tyler Ervin and Dexter Williams, who Dexter Williams is a former running back at Notre Dame. Believe this is his rookie year also. Those guys are going to be the only active running backs if Aaron Jones doesn't play. Now, Tyler Ervin has been a guy that's gotten a few snaps this year. He has 4 for 43 rushing on the season, 6 for 33 receiving this year. Ervin is not a bad option if you have Aaron Jones and if you have Jamal Williams and you need somebody to plug in this week badly in a deep league. Look, this Packer offense, as long as it remains very good, Ervin will probably produce a little bit. I know it is a tough matchup against the 49ers, but I still think that that's not a terrible option at all. Now, moving on to the Chicago Bears, we have wide receiver Anthony Miller and wide receiver Darnell Mooney, both having pretty solid games. Miller, 8 for 73 receiving on 11 targets. He led the team in that, also had a 26.8% target share. Wide receiver Darnell Mooney, 5 for 69 and a touchdown receiving on 6 targets. It's pretty much unknown who is the number 2 guy each week. It really depends. Mooney has a ton of air yards this year. He just hasn't executed on a lot of those air yards, mostly because the throws have been so bad by whether that's Trubisky or Foles. But again, it's a week-to-week thing. Who's going to be the number 2 guy? I don't really know what to tell you. Miller looked great in this game. So did Mooney, but nothing else to say there. Minnesota Vikings, nothing to report in terms of injuries, in terms of waiver wire. Great win for them in Green Bay. Dalvin Cook was unreal, 4 touchdowns. Moving on to the Detroit Lions, you have wide receiver Kenny Golladay left the game with a hip injury. Wide receiver Marvin Jones, as a result, 3 for 39 and 2 touchdowns on 7 targets. Tied second in the team with a 17.5% target share. Jones is a decent option if Golladay remains out long-term. We're going to have to monitor that injury as the week goes on. Jones also still available in just under 45% of leagues. If Golladay misses time, again, not a terrible option there. Also, moving on to the running back snap share with the Detroit Lions. Look, this has been an area of concern all year. DeAndre Swift is just so much better than every other back in that room. Meanwhile, Patricia has seemingly refused to play him. But this was the highest snap share he's got all year, 61.7%, but only had 6 carries for 1 yard rushing, 3 for 22 receiving on 4 targets. Adrian Peterson, 20% of the snap share, 5 for 7 rushing, 1 for 5 receiving. Really tough matchup for Swift. They were also getting killed, so I don't completely blame him for this week. Tough matchup, getting destroyed by the Colts, not running a ton. I expect Swift to bounce back in the Lions next game, but it's good to see that Swift is finally getting the snaps that he deserves. So we're going to move on here to the NFC South, and in the NFC South, hold on here, we have the Tampa Bay Bucks. Let's get this graphic up here, and the Tampa Bay Bucks last night played against the Giants in a tight game. Wide receiver Chris Godwin missed Week 8 with a finger injury. And the running back snap share, definitely interesting one. We had Ronald Jones, who against the Raiders last week got pretty much benched because he had a bad drop, maybe even more than one bad drop. And then this game, he fumbles early after getting a lot of the drives early. And as a result, Leonard Fournette gets 73% of the snap share, 15 for 52 rushing, 3 for 19 receiving on 6 targets. Ronald Jones only gets 24% of the snap share, 7 for 23 rushing, 4 for 23 receiving on 4 targets. Whether this means Fournette will be the guy going forward or not, who knows? I ultimately think Jones is the more talented running back, but Fournette's definitely a lot more reliable in the passing game, especially with the way that Jones has been dropping these passes. So who knows what they're going to roll with going forward, but congratulations if you have Fournette, because he has a real opportunity to get a ton of carries moving forward over Ronald Jones. Another guy that I mentioned last week, wide receiver Scotty Miller, thought he was going to be a good option against the Giants. He only had 3 catches for 35 yards receiving on 6 targets, but Scotty Miller likely has seen most of his targets his time getting a lot of targets and getting a lot of receiving yards is coming to a close with Antonio Brown playing next week. Didn't put Brown up there despite him making his debut because everyone knows about that. He is making his debut next week against the Saints, has been added in most leagues. But we're going to move on here to the Atlanta Falcons, where wide receiver Calvin Ridley left the game with a foot injury. It's set to be a minor foot sprain, so he's questionable for next week, week 9, but he could be back. So hopefully he is back. If he's not back, you got to look at guys like Russell Gage, who are going to get his targets. But moving on to the New Orleans Saints, we have wide receivers Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, both missing week 8. Sanders for COVID and Thomas because of an ankle/hamstring injury. And one guy that's really thrived with these guys being out is tight end Jared Cook. Cook had 5 catches for 51 yards and a touchdown on 7 targets in this game, tied second on the team. He's absolutely thrived with these guys being out. TD in the last 3 games, still available in nearly 25% of leagues. I know that's not a huge number, but if you're in one of those 25% of leagues, pick him up for sure. Then moving on to the Carolina Panthers, we have running back Christian McCaffrey, who missed week 8 once again with an ankle injury, could possibly return in week 9, and wide receiver Curtis Samuel, 4 for 31 and 1 receiving on 5 targets, 19.2% of the target share, and 3 for 23 and 1 rushing. I have a feeling that once McCaffrey comes back, which I have a feeling will be in week 9, a lot of this Curtis Samuel usage from the last 2 weeks will likely decrease. So moving on to our last division, we have the NFC West, starting off with the Seattle Seahawks. We had running backs Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde both missed this game. Carson because of a foot injury and Hyde because of a hamstring injury. And as a result, the rookie running back from Miami, DJ Dallas, getting 79.1% of the snaps, 18 for 41 and one touchdown rushing, 5 for 17 and a touchdown receiving on 5 targets. Really, really solid week for Dallas. He's barely got snaps this year. And for him to come in and do that, really nice. And I have actually Carson and Hyde in one of my season-long leagues, and I picked up DJ Dallas literally last second, threw him in the starting lineup, and as a result, I mean, he pretty much won me the week. So good for DJ Dallas, played really, really well. And if Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde do remain out, then DJ Dallas is going to be a solid option. Travis Homer, who I thought would get a lot more snaps, only got 10.4% of the snaps, only 1 carry for 4 yards rushing. So again, Dallas, good option if Carson and Hyde remain out. Arizona Cardinals on a bye week. And moving on to the San Francisco 49ers, we have a comment here that says Kittle replacements. Well, that's perfect timing because I'm getting the Kittle replacements here right now. We had George Kittle left the game with a broken foot, out a while. So it's going to be tight end Jordan Reed, who is currently on IR, but he comes off IR likely next week or the week after, but he's going to be back soon. And I don't know if you remember, but week 2 against the Jets, George Kittle did not play. Jordan Reed had 7 catches for 50 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I expect Reed to play a huge role going forward. So if you have Kittle, picking up Reed is definitely not a bad option at all. Moving on to the running backs here, the running back situation in San Francisco. We have running back Raheem Mostert, who missed week 8 with an ankle injury, and then running back Tevin Coleman, who came back off of IR for this game, but then left the game with a knee injury. So the running back snap share with Jeff Wilson Jr. also out. We had Jerick McKinnon at 50% of the snaps, 3 carries for -1 rushing, 4 catches for 40 receiving on 4 targets. McKinnon, I guess they're just using him as a receiving back at this point because JaMychal Hasty got 12 carries compared to McKinnon's 3. Hasty getting 40.9% of the snaps, 12 for 29 and 1 touchdown rushing, 1 for 2 receiving. Wide receiver Deebo Samuel missed the game with a hamstring injury, and I didn't put it up there because he's owned in most leagues, but as a result, Brandon Ayuk went off. I mean, he had a game, 8 catches for 91 yards and a touchdown. I believe he had 11 targets. Let me just double check this right now. Ayuk had 8 catches for 91 yards on 11 targets. Also a guy that played well with Deebo out is Kendrick Bourne, 8 catches for 81 yards on 10 targets. So double-digit targets for both Ayuk and Bourne. Ayuk owned in most leagues. Deebo probably coming back either this week or the next, so I wouldn't stress too much about Bourne. Wouldn't look too much to picking him up, but good to see him playing well. And now we have the Los Angeles Rams. We had Tyler Higbee return, 2 for 14 receiving on 4 targets. Running back Darrell Henderson also left the game with a thigh injury. And as a result, the running back snap share, we had Malcolm Brown gaining 57.6% of the snaps, 10 for 40 rushing, 2 for 17 receiving. Cam Akers, the rookie, getting 21.7% of the snaps, 1 for 19 rushing. Henderson, before he got hurt, 8 for 47 rushing and a 1 for 11 receiving. So it's pretty clear to me that Henderson was the guy before he got hurt in this game. Hopefully the thigh injury is not significant. And if the thigh injury is not significant and Henderson is back next week or the week after, then he'll probably remain the guy in LA. But it is frustrating as, somebody who, if you do own Darrell Henderson, it's frustrating to see Malcolm Brown still getting a ton of these carries, even though Henderson has been so good this year. So that's it for the waiver wire show, but I'm going to get to a few questions here. As I mentioned, we have comments, live comments. So that's one of the reasons I like the live show so much. I love people watching live and being able to comment. And as a result, I decided I was going to save all these comments for the end. And now I will answer any questions I have. So Lyrical Loop says, should I do Kelsey for Robinson and Waller? So I assume that means, I don't know which Robinson that is. If it's James Robinson, if it's Allen Robinson, Lyrical Loop, if you're still in this chat, then be sure to specify which Robinson it is. But honestly, if it's either Allen Robinson or if it's James Robinson, I mean, that's definitely a deal you have to do. If it's, I guess the only other Robinson there could be would be DeMarcus Robinson. If you're doing that for DeMarcus Robinson, I would not do it. But if it's for James Robinson or Allen Robinson, I definitely do it. I mean, you're downgrading slightly a tight end, but you're getting a stud in return in James Robinson or Allen Robinson. So yes, I would do that deal if that's one of the guys that you're getting. We have MHP says, keep up the good work. You should make a prediction NFL video of your own prop video. Not sure what, thank you, by the way. Thank you, MHP. Not sure what you mean by you should make a prediction NFL video of your own prop video. I do have an NFL player prop video, if you don't already know, on Sal Vetri's YouTube channel, but I am definitely looking into expanding more videos going forward. As you guys know, I just started with this YouTube channel, so currently I'm doing the 2 videos a week for my channel, the waiver wire video here on Tuesdays, and also the college football betting picks on Fridays, along with the video on Sal's channel, the NFL player prop video. Looking to expand on more ideas, so if you do have ideas for me, throw them in the comments. I am open to pretty much anything. And we had a comment here, Kittle replacements from Pat Bokikio. Kittle replacements, as I said, Jordan Reed, he's going to take his spot. So Jordan Reed, he did well when Kittle was out, as I mentioned before, against the New York Jets, had 7 catches, 50 yards, and 2 touchdowns when Kittle was out. I definitely look into Reed. Other guys you could look into, I mean, there's a bunch of guys. If Jimmy Graham's still available, if Jared Cook is still available, those are all guys. But probably assuming that those guys are not available in your league, I really would look at Jordan Reed because I think that he's going to do well because the 49ers love to use the tight end, and he has a proven record of playing well when Kittle is out. Now we have a comment from, we got my brother in the comment here. We have Tyler Burd wants to know, would you trade Hopkins for Thielen, Deontay, and Fournette? Wow. Well, I think the main question here is, obviously you're going to start Thielen when you trade Hopkins, but are you going to start Deontay Johnson and Leonard Fournette? If the answer is no, and they're not going to be in your starting lineup, I would not even consider this deal. He also says here, the rest of my team besides Hopkins is total garbage. So if you really do need that depth, yeah, I'd highly consider it. But that would be kind of a desperation trade. I love Hopkins, but if Fournette truly is the starting running back going forward, then it's you got to make the deal, in my opinion, if your team is that bad. So that'll be a wrap on today's Week 9 Waiver Wire show. Thank you to everybody for watching, and be sure to like this video. Smash the like button. Really helps me out. The more likes, the more comments, the more people will see this video. So thank you for that. And be sure to tune in for my college football betting picks that will be released on either Thursday or Friday, probably on Friday, but I usually release it on Fridays. That'll be released on Friday. But other than that, also be sure to check out my NFL player props video on Sal Vetri's YouTube channel every Friday. New one for Week 9, obviously coming this Friday. So that is it. Goodbye, everyone, and good luck with your waiver claims this week.